Thank you, Senator Ruston. Senator Waters.
Thanks, Chair. Hi there. Just starting off on World Heritage, how many staff do you have working on World Heritage matters?
Senator, I'll take that on notice because the number of staff working on World Heritage matters really varies significantly according to what it is we're needing to deal with at any particular time in the World Heritage space. The staff of the Heritage branch in Wildlife Heritage and Marine Division, some but not all of their efforts are directed towards World Heritage matters. A lot of their effort is directed towards to national heritage places, assessments and so on.
So just on Australian World Heritage areas, the 19 that we've got, how many staff do you have working on those?
Well, again, Senator, this is something I'll take on notice. The efforts of the Heritage branch are generally directed towards to World Heritage. The way we're structured, we are structured into streams. So we have a natural heritage team, an historic heritage team, an Indigenous heritage team, and embedded in their responsibilities is a focus on World Heritage. So I can't be precise without taking that on notice.
So you don't actually have a World Heritage stream?
We have a team which is directly responsible for our engagement with the World Heritage Committee, and it coordinates across the rest of the Heritage branch and indeed other parts of the department to enable that engagement in relation to World Heritage. It's difficult to put an estimate on the number of staff because that activity goes across many different divisions in the department.
Right. Well, can you at least tell me how many are on that team that manages relations between the government and the World Heritage Committee?
There's approximately 6 people in that team that manage directly our engagement with the World Heritage Committee, but I would not want that to be in any way represented as the totality of our efforts directed around World Heritage, because that's certainly not the case.
Okay, but it would have been helpful if you could have given more clarity about the totality
Senator,
of efforts.
That's why I've offered to take the question on notice, because I don't have precise numbers.
Thank you. I'm just a bit surprised that given that we only have 19 World Heritage areas and that we have estimates 3 times a year, that you're not able to give me the numbers of people working on World Heritage.
We'll take that as a comment, thanks, Senator.
Yeah,
We've undertaken to provide the information on notice.
It's fairly disappointing that you're not able to provide that specificity.
Well, Senator, I suspect, in fairness, a number of staff in the department work across multiple functions and have differing responsibilities. So, I mean, to sort of ask a blunt how many people work on World Heritage areas question, the officials will come up with an answer for you as best they can. But really, I'm not sure what the aim or purpose of your question necessarily is, and the snide comments directed at officials really are quite unfair.
Well, I'm interested in your remark that those staff do a range of tasks. I would be concerned if we don't have people who are solely dedicated to World Heritage.
I'm sure there are some who are solely dedicated. I'm sure there are some who perform numerous functions. I mean, obviously, some of Mr Oxley's time is spent on such matters. Some of Dr Drips's time is spent on such matters. Would you like them to spend time trying to apportion how much of their time they spend on such matters to answer your question?
Well, I'm more interested in the dedicated staff in that area, so I'll await that response on notice. But can you turn your minds to specifically 2 World Heritage areas? Firstly, the Tasmanian World Heritage area. Are you able to give me an approximation, if not a definitive answer, on how many staff are dedicated to the ongoing management of that area?
Well, Senator, Mr Oxley has responded to the question in the general sense, and the answer in the specific sense can be also covered off in the question on notice.
Is that the case, Mr Oxley? And are they able to shed any light on how many folk are involved in the ongoing management of the Tasmanian World Heritage area?
Dr Drips, I think, has answered that question already, Senator.
By taking it on notice, are you
Yes.
able to shed any further light on that for us at the moment?
Again, the number of people working on any particular World Heritage matter depends entirely on the body of work that needs to be done at any particular time. So we would have more people working on Tasmanian World Heritage right at the moment in supporting the government's objectives in relation to the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area relative to what we might have had in previous times.
Okay.
And I think, Senator, in relation to your question of how many staff involved in management, well, the management of World Heritage areas is related to the ownership of them, and so the Tasmanian World Heritage areas are managed by the Tasmanian government. There are Commonwealth staff who are involved in terms of their status as World Heritage areas and the oversight of complying with some of the World Heritage principles and those types of things. But to phrase the question in a way that makes it sound like it's somehow a Commonwealth National Park that we are responsible for managing, that is most definitely not the case. It's managed
Okay,
by
so
the
there's
Tasmanian government, and if you you'd need to ask them as to how many of their staff they actually have involved in the management. I'm sure it's a lot more than the Commonwealth staff who have more of an oversight and policy role.
Okay, so oversight and policy, so there's no federal staff involved in the ongoing management of the Tasmanian World Heritage Area?
It depends probably what you mean by management, I suspect. Mr Oxley or
I'm
others
just
can
going off your
probably
words,
define
so-
what the federal staff are responsible for.
Yes, so Senator, if we're talking about on-ground management of the World Heritage Area, then no.
Okay.
We do, however, have staff who are involved in managing for example, state of conservation reports, which are developed by the Tasmanian Department of Primary Industries, Parks, Water and Environment, and we coordinate the state of conservation reporting for that property and other properties, other World Heritage properties. So it's through that engagement that we have a line of sight into the management of these properties, together with our engagement with the various committees and so forth that exist around each of the World Heritage places.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. We did get there in the end. I appreciate that. Just in relation to outcome 1, so that I understand covers regulation and heritage, I note that there, from page 35 of your budget papers, that there appears to be 128 staff that will be reduced from outcome 1. I'm interested how many of those will be from the World Heritage section, or folk who have World Heritage amongst their work obligations.
I think it's too early to say how that will fall out in particular areas. That's an estimate over the coming year. We're going through our divisional plans at the moment, and that'll be determined over the next month or so, looking at what will happen in 14-15.
So are you able to rule out reductions to staff working on World Heritage
Not at this stage,
areas?
no.
Okay.
But the department takes a flexible approach to managing the priorities to meet the government's priorities and agenda, and World Heritage is a priority of the government. So we'll record our staff accordingly with some flexibility, but in principle there's no ruling out
Okay.
across the department.
Thank
Senator.
you. In relation to the heritage funding, I note that there'll be a reduction from $41.5 million to $32 million. What are the implications of that cut? What work will not proceed?
Senator, can you give me a reference to that number, where you're drawing that from?
No, unfortunately I can't.
I'm not aware of the reduction that you're referring to.
Okay, so it's in the portfolio budget statement, but I don't have a page number here, I'm sorry.
So could you repeat it again, Senator?
Yeah, so it's the heritage funding to be cut from $41.5 million to $32 million.
Okay.
Okay, so just to assist the Senate, we're on page 34 of the portfolio budget statement. It's the total funding for program 1.4, which is reducing by the amount that you've identified, Senator.
So which heritage work will you not proceed with as a result of that cut?
Well, outcome 1.4 is a very broad outcome, and I'm not in the position now, Senator, where I can advise you of that. I'll need to take that on notice.
Okay, so you haven't worked out yet what you'll have to drop.
As the Secretary's indicated, Senator, one of the activities that the department undertakes after the federal budget's handed down is the development of detailed business plans and the definition of activities and staffing that are assigned to each of those activities. We're in the early stages of undertaking that work presently and would be able to advise the Senate further on that later.
Okay, what's the timeframe on when you'll expect to be able to work out what will have to go as a result of those cuts?
Well, as was covered in general evidence yesterday, we're looking to adjust our staffing numbers to our budget for the 1st of July of this year. It's usual practice that we develop our business plans through the course of June with a view to them being endorsed by management early in the new financial year so that they can effectively guide the work of the department during that next financial year period.
Okay, thank you. Moving now to the government's plan to give the responsibility for approvals down to state governments. And can I just check that we've got the...
Senator, I think this is in program 1.5. It's outcome 1, but it's program 1.5.
If you could let me ask, I think this, I'm happy to direct it to a different section, but my question went specifically to the draft decision of UNESCO about the Great Barrier Reef. So I'm hoping that given the World Heritage context that we've got the right folk here. Particularly recommendation 6, which mentions that UNESCO believes that handoff of responsibilities is, quote, premature. Can I ask what the Australian government is doing about that, and have you advised the Minister that to proceed with this handoff of powers to state governments, given that UNESCO says it's premature, might actually increase the chances of the Great Barrier Reef being placed on the World Heritage in Danger list?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. As you're well aware, Australia is part of the way through a long program of reform to ensure the long-term protection of the reef. And this year's draft decision by the World Heritage Committee is part of that process. The Minister has stated publicly that it is his intention to ensure that the long-term sustainability plan is available for the community to consider in advance of finalising the one-stop shop arrangements in Queensland. And we would anticipate that not all members of the World Heritage Committee would necessarily appreciate that point or the nature of Australia's federation. So we would intend, subject to receiving delegation instructions from the government, to explain further to members of the World Heritage Committee how that process is intended to operate, and that may or may not result in the World Heritage Committee making a different decision than the one that was drafted for them by their advisory bodies.
So what is the timeframe on that long-term plan? And are you referring to the strategic assessment there or Reef Plan 2050?
So the strategic assessment's completion is imminent. We would envisage that would be likely to occur early in July. The work on the long-term sustainability plan needs to be completed in time for Australia to report back to the World Heritage Committee for the 1st of February in 2015. So that work would be completed between now and the end of this year. So I would anticipate that there would be an advanced draft of the long-term sustainability plan, possibly towards the end of August or into September of this year. But again, that's anticipation based on work that hasn't yet been completed.
Okay, so if the long-term strategic plan is due for completion before the 1st of February next year, and you say that work will occur before the Queensland Government is given the responsibility for approvals that might damage the reef, am I correct then that the Queensland Government won't assume those responsibilities until after February? That is contrary to my understanding.
That's not actually what I said, Senator. What I said was that the Minister had announced that the draft long-term sustainability plan would be released before the agreements on the one-stop shop were finalised.
Right, okay, so we'll have a draft document, but that is somehow, you think that's enough to meet UNESCO's concern that it's premature?
Well, that would be asking for my opinion, Senator.
Okay, well, I hope the Minister's turning his mind to the serious warnings that we've had for several years now that the reef may be put on that World Heritage Endangered list, and I trust that you're advising him accordingly.
The government's taking this process extremely seriously, Senator.
Good, I should hope so.
And believes that we do have appropriate plans to ensure the long-term protection of the reef, and will continue to work on the implementation of those plans.
Okay, well, in that vein, how will the Australian government guarantee that Australia can actually fulfil its obligations under the World Heritage Convention if it will no longer control the approvals for damaging development in the reef?
Well, Senator, and I'm sure that the colleagues from the One Stop Shop team will be able to take these questions more generally in Outcome 1.5. The process of negotiating the approvals bilateral is extremely intensive in terms of aligning the standards for consideration of under the EPBC Act with the state laws that are intended to be accredited. We're in the process of working through those negotiations with each state and territory, and when those laws meet the required standards, then the government will be in a position to proceed with the approvals bilaterals agreement. The Queensland Government has already begun to strengthen its legislative protection of the reef. Its state planning policy now requires explicit consideration of matters protected under Australia's national environmental law, including threatened species and the outstanding universal value of World Heritage properties. The draft port strategy prohibits dredging for the development of new or the expansion of existing port facilities outside the key long-established ports at Townsville, Abbott Point, Hay Point, Mackay and Gladstone for the next 10 years. And we're committed to making sure that the process of the one-stop shop maintains the high environmental standards required under the EPBC Act.
So you're confident that the Australian government will be able to guarantee that its obligations to fulfil the World Heritage Convention responsibilities can be done, even though it won't actually have anything to do with it anymore? You've got confidence in Campbell Newman to do that?
That's the way in which the agreements have been constructed and are being negotiated, Senator.
Okay, well, I have a grave fears for the reef.
The approvals bilateral, Senator, are very detailed, and in many instances they will raise the standard of activities occurring at state levels.
Well, they'll have to. The state laws are pathetic.
As well as ensuring compliance with, of course, our federal requirements. So you can be quite confident, Senator, that we want to make sure these are robust and that they do ensure that we do not have a diminution of compliance against federal environmental standards.
Well, I'm glad you raised compliance, Minister, because I want to take you now to the Gladstone inquiry report that was recently given to the Minister, which is very damning in that it states that compliance was poor
Senator,
and that conditions were poorly drafted.
You are now getting into some of the greater detail of Program 1.5. Now, we're in the hands of the committee. We can see if officials are present and able to take those questions, but,
all right, well,
that's not the area that we're in.
Well, look, I'll phrase it this way. Given the indictment on compliance in that report as it relates to a World Heritage area, has the department advised the Minister around the need for improvements to compliance in World Heritage areas?
Well, Senator, aside from the subjective language in your questioning, and the fact that
pretty clearly in the report,
as I said before, it's really more relevant to Area 1.5. You've also asked a question about what the department has advised the Minister, and I think you know that we don't go to matters of advice.
Well, I'm concerned that the government's not taking that report seriously.
If you want to ask some questions about the response to that, that's fine. The right place to do it is in 1.5. As I say, if the committee is happy, I guess if there aren't any other questions that anybody else has in 1.4, well, then we can start dealing with these matters if the officials are present.
Well, I'm happy to re-agitate it in 1.5, but given that it's about a World Heritage area, it's often unclear as to where these questions sit, but I will take that up in the next session.
Can I just, Senator, just to respond, the office, when they're here, will be able to explain very clearly how the compliance processes and procedures and outcomes have changed in the department over the past couple of years. So just as the department responding on behalf of what the department has done, over the
Okay.
past couple of years. We can go through that in considerable detail for you.
Thank you. Yeah, and given that the report's only 3 weeks old, I'd be interested in improvements made after that date as opposed to years ago, but thank you. I'll take that up
The
in 1.5.
department may well have been making changes over time, and they'll obviously respond to that, that have improved their practices in the time between those...
In the last 3 weeks, good.
those
Pleased to
identified
hear it.
actions and the report being handed down. It's not just a matter of
Excellent.
what may have changed in 3 weeks.
Can I just clarify? I mean, Senator, the report goes back to events of a couple of years ago, not just the past couple of weeks, and the material that our officers will go through is explaining over the past couple of years what's changed.
Okay,
In-
excellent.
in
I'll look
after-
forward to
after
that
those
when we
events.
get there. Is the Australian Government trying to alter any of the World Heritage Committee's draft recommendations in relation to the Great Barrier Reef?
Well, as I indicated, Senator, we've yet to receive delegation instructions on this matter. However, there are a number of parts of the draft decision with which the government would be expected to have a contrary view, including the one that you've raised with regard to the one-stop shops in recommendation 6, including the statements about the lack of consideration of other options around Abbott Point in draft recommendation 7, and including the arrangements with regard to the Queensland Port Strategy, which are referred to in recommendation 8.
Okay, so why does the Australian Government have a contrary view to the World Heritage Committee in relation to those recommendations?
Well, I might just say in the first instance that the draft decision is not the recommendation of the World
draft
Heritage
recommendations.
Committee. That's very, very important to put on the public record that at this stage you have a technical report prepared by bureaucrats, which is a recommendation to the World Heritage Committee.
Bureaucrats criticising bureaucrats, we've heard it all.
In terms of the differences of opinion, if I recall recommendation 6 we've covered already in terms of the government's intention to release the draft of the long-term sustainability plan in advance of the conferral of powers to states through the approvals bilateral.
The draft of that plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
The recommendation relating to Abbott Point, thank you. The recommendation with regard to Abbott Point does not acknowledge Australia's robust and rigorous environmental impact assessment processes and does not acknowledge the comprehensive assessment of alternative and potentially less impacting development and disposal options for Abbott Point. It also does not recognise that the Australian Government very carefully considered any potential impacts on the outstanding universal value of the property in terms of the decision that was made with regard to Abbott Point. Recommendation 8 in particular refers very broadly to proposed development outside of priority port development areas and doesn't acknowledge the existing and ongoing work of the Australian Government and the Queensland Government in terms of the requirements of the Queensland Port Strategy.
So just in relation to what you contend is a robust and rigorous environmental impact statement process, and you say that there's been a comprehensive analysis of alternatives, particularly in relation to disposal of dredge spoil, and perhaps this isn't the right area to ask it, but when I've previously asked in estimates what was the consideration of those alternatives, was there a cost-benefit analysis done of alternatives to offshore dumping? The answer was no, there was no cost-benefit analysis. So how is that a comprehensive, robust or rigorous consideration of alternatives if you're not even doing a cost-benefit analysis of alternatives?
Well, Senator, the officers responsible for that area are not actually here yet, but
Right,
what I would
of
say
course.
is that in undertaking the environmental impact assessment, the proponents do consider a range of different options, and in assessing it, it's not a usual part of the department's role to undertake a cost-benefit analysis of the projects. that are put
Precisely.
forward
So
to
how
us.
can you contend that it's a robust and rigorous process on the part of the department if you're just
Well-
taking the proponent's word for it?
With respect, Senator, we do not just take the proponent's word
Well,
for
there's
it.
no
We
cost-benefit
undertake a
analysis.
detailed assessment of the ecological impacts of the proposed activity. We undergo extensive discussions. We take technical advice on the projects, and that process is extremely rigorous.
Well, I hope that you'll be able to continue and, in fact, increase the level of rigour despite the staff cuts that you'll soon be working out where they come from. That's a long-standing position that you actually need people to do good work. Has the Minister or the Department taken any steps to alert the World Heritage Committee or the Secretariat about the findings in that recent Gladstone-Bundawal inquiry report?
I believe that I signed a letter recently on that, Senator, but we'll have to check.
Okay.
I'm almost certain that we did.
Okay. Given that that report finds that compliance is poor, that the conditions were poorly drafted, and that complaints of alleged breaches of those conditions by members of the public weren't appropriately followed up, will you now review the conditions placed on development in other World Heritage areas, particularly the Abbott Point approval?
Well, Senator, as we indicated, the officers from the Environmental Assessment and Compliance Division will be able to take you through in some detail the improvements that have been undertaken in the division over the last 3 or 4 years. I would suggest to you that the time period between the two approval decisions is quite long, and that we have learnt a great deal in the meantime about how better to construct robust outcome-focused conditions.
Good. Okay, because the conditions, as I've read them, are actually very vague and frankly just defer everything to a subsequent plan that's yet to be drafted. It doesn't...
Well, Senator, if we're going to go to the
Seem to be
conditions
rigorous or
imposed on a
comprehensive.
particular
That's
EPBC
1.5, is it?
approval,
Order.
let's do that in their proper place,
1.5,
please.
okay, let's do that.
And I'm sure we can go through some of the detail of those conditions then if you would like.
Yeah, thank you. I'll attempt to have the time to do that, but that'll be a matter for the Chair. Given the findings of that report, which are very damning, that find that compliance and even the drafting of conditions in World Heritage areas have been vague and insufficient, what hope does the rest of the Australian environment have if we can't even get World Heritage management right?
Well, Senator, that's really a lovely rhetorical question for you to ask. As
Would you
we've
care
said,
to answer it?
if you want the department in the relevant section to go through the detailed changes that have happened over a number of years, not just in 3 weeks, a number of years in relation to improvements in standards, the department will be more than happy to take you through that. But it is worth noting that those decisions were made a number of years ago, and as Dr. Dripps has rightly said, as you would rightly expect, the department has made continual improvements to their standards and processes and activities during that period of time. And of course, they take the findings of this report very seriously, and where further improvements are required, I've got no doubt that they are being made. But you can use all of the rhetorical flourish you like for questions like that, but it's not really a question that that either seeks an answer from officials or is being asked in the relevant part of the program.
So in relation to those further improvements, how will they be carried out when there'll be 450 fewer staff?
Well, Chair, can I seek some clarity? Do you want us to bring the officials to the table for this?
Well, if you're not
for
able
this
to
relevant
answer it,
section?
then
Are we going to skip the program through to 1.5 or not?
No, we're not, Senator Birmingham. We'll stick to this program and 1.5 will be on later on, because Senator Urquhart has further questions for this section as well. Senator Waters.
Thanks, Chair. I want to move now to, well, depending on how much the Chair will allow me to continue for, the Threatened Species Commissioner, which Senator Ruston started to ask about as well. So you've said that it's a non-statutory appointment. It will somehow be complementary but not duplicative of the existing Threatened Species Scientific Committee. Can you outline to me what funding that position has associated with it?
Senator, the Threatened Species Commissioner funding arrangements for the Commissioner are being resolved as part of the department's budget processes and business planning over the next month or so.
Okay, so there was no additional funds committed. The department's just got to find the money somehow within its departmental allocation.
It is an activity that we will support as part of our core business around threatened species, Senator.
If it's a non-statutory role and we've already got a Threatened Species Scientific Committee, what's this person going to do?
Senator, I outlined earlier the terms of reference, or part of the terms of reference for the Commissioner. I'd be happy to elaborate on that more if that would be helpful.
Well, I did jot down what you said before, and one of the points you mentioned was that there would be wider engagement with the conservation sector. Yesterday, we discovered that we discussed that the GVESHO funds, which have previously facilitated consultation with the community and conservation sector, has been cut. So how will the appointment of a non-statutory person with no additional funds, who's meant to lead consultation with the community and
So-
conservation groups, work if you
Senator-
then cut their funding as well?
Senator, it's not for government to fund other people to talk to government. Other entities can be free to talk to government, whether it is through the Threatened Species Commissioner, parliamentary inquiries, or any other process government runs. But it's not for government to be funding third-party organisations to make representations to government.
So community consultation is not something
Community
that this government
consultation
values?
is vital, Senator, absolutely vital, but community consultation involves people in the community putting their views forward.
And if they've previously been resourced to do that as a peak body, for example, the Queensland Conservation Council, and now that funding's been removed, and yet you're still expecting them to be able to fulfil those obligations?
You may have a philosophical view that the government should fund a whole range of different third-party commentators around the community. I think the government
Yes, I
should
do
keep
believe in community
indeed,
consultation.
the government differs.
Right, okay, well, we're going to be in for a hell of a few years.
Farmers Federation as well.
Well,
A
I
very
might-
valid point, Senator Williams. I mean, yesterday I actually...
Oh, they're
I
okay, we
heard-
can fund them, can we? Just not conservation
I
groups.
heard your questioning
I'm being
yesterday of Senator
sarcastic,
Cormann and
Senator
Senator Waters, and you used the review of the Water Act as an example. And you seem to suggest that the Queensland Conservation Council should be funded to make submissions to the review of the Water Act, yet presumably the National Irrigators Council should not.
Yeah.
I'm just simply pointing out that on the
They're
same
both
day as
valid
they had their funding
stakeholders.
cut, they
I've
were asked to
invited both
consult.
of them to make submissions to the Water Act review.
And on the same day as their funding was cut, they were asked to consult on an important piece of legislation. I think it just highlights the lack of
And I want their
emphasis
views.
and importance that the
I
government
want their
puts on
views, but like
genuine
any other
consultation.
stakeholder, they can fund themselves.
Well, I think we can probably leave it there, Minister, with that very clear statement of the government's priorities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.